And I work for a company called Zeit. You should look it up. It's really interesting. I already saw our tools like mentioned in all the other talks. It's really funny. But yeah, I work on this thing called Next.js, and I'm going to tell you about it today. So yeah, let's dive right in. So generally, when you start building websites, which most of you probably do, if you're not like an AI engineer using JavaScript or something, I don't know, you start with some kind of component system, right? Because you want your code to be really consistent across like all these pages that you're building. You don't want 5 versions of the same button and like 10 versions of the header. Some companies have 300 versions of their header. I'm not kidding, it's literally a thing. But yeah, you want some component system to help you manage that, right? So there are some libraries in this space, like UI libraries, right? So you have React and Angular and Vue and like all these other tools, Svelte. But let's say for the sake of everyone knows React, I suppose. Let's use React, right? So has everyone heard of React before? Can we do a show of hands? Everyone's nodding, but like it's probably everyone. If you didn't, it's fine. I can do a really simple introduction to it. My slide is actually one of the introductions, which is React is pretty simple-ish. There's people that are going to disagree with me, but like it's pretty simple. Because the most basic React component is just a JavaScript function that returns HTML, JSX basically. So you do h1 hello world and it just works. However, going to production with React is really complex actually. So oftentimes when you start building your project and you are like, oh, let's use React, it feels like this, like you're almost ready to implement your hello world React app, right? Because you have to set up all these things like Webpack and Babel and like I don't know, you have to make sure that you're optimizing for production and like there's so much stuff to go into basically. And in reality, it's gotten a lot easier through tooling and like all these other things that the React team has been doing, and you have dev tools and like really good visibility in like what's going on. You have React hooks now, which everyone loves. But going to production is still really complex. So generally, you need some kind of framework for React that can scale with your project. Because React is in a really interesting position where it's only a UI library, and it handles one thing really well, which is rendering to pages. And the only problem there is that it's really hard to build production-grade apps using just React, because you can only render UI using React, and you have to invent all these other things to make it work. So generally, when you start building a website, you start off with some static pages, maybe a prototype or something like that. Like, say you're building a marketing page, and it has to be like fast and reliable because it's static. And content changes require some kind of rebuild because it's all static pages, right? And as your project grows, pages get added to that solution. And all these pages may have different requirements. So say you go from like, you're building your marketing site, and then like some manager comes in and he's like, hey, I want to like do this dynamic stuff, and it just has to work, right? So then you're like, now I have a problem because we started this like static website and it just doesn't work. So I have to take this other framework or like this other thing to make it work, basically. So really that brings up the question, how do I make my app scale with changes, right? And furthermore, there's another problem, which is how do I make my app scale with size? So this is a small graphic that the Chrome team made on what happens when you have just one single JavaScript bundle that serves everything. And it's sort of like the default if you use React. Because you just like start with an entry point, which is like your app file. And then your app file has imports for components, and all these different components render your UI. But in most cases, you're not rendering all your UI in one view, right? You're not rendering the settings page if you're going to the home page and that kind of thing. So as you can see, FCP and TTI are FCP is first contentful paint, which basically means the first time that you can actually see content on your page. And then TTY is like when the whole page gets interactive. So that means that you can click on links that do like certain stuff. Your like validation on fields works and that kind of thing. And generally, you just have like one big JavaScript bundle and one big CSS bundle, right? And that grows uncontrollably. Like you're always adding new code to your project. You're generally either deleting stuff because you replaced it with some new code, but it's like never going down, basically. So yeah, this is where Next comes in. And Next is a framework for React that helps you scale with these changes. And it allows you to focus on what's important, which is like all your logic that you have. Basically, making money. So you start by, to start using Next, you start by creating a pages directory. This is nothing special, it's just a directory. So we create this directory called pages. And in every file in the pages directory is mapped to a route. So say you have pages about.js, it will map to /about, right? But what if you want to do like a /product/ID, like some custom, or not really custom, but like dynamic routing? Next allows this since version 9 to basically create subdirectories and then put in this special file, which is marked by brackets, that will automatically inject the ID into your file, basically. But let's back up a bit. What is a page? Because I haven't showed you a page. And it's actually just a React component. So like I was showing earlier, you have React components in React, and that returns some HTML. And a page in Next is just a React component. So if you create the about.js file, you go to /about and you return this React component, it will just show hello world in H1. So there's just one problem here, which is that how can you choose how pages are rendered? Because generally frameworks have, or like generally applications have different requirements. So you might want to do a server-side rendered, on-demand server-side rendered application that it has dynamic data that's like that you get on the client side or on the server side, I mean, and then like some other page which is like a dashboard. You might want to only a fully server client-side render. I mean, so every page can have different requirements, right? But as you can see, the Chrome team created this really beautiful infographic, which is quite complex, but let's go through it really quick. You have server-side rendering, static server-side rendering, server-side rendering with rehydration, and client-side rendering with pre-rendering, and full client-side rendering, right? All sounds really simple to all of you, right? Probably not that much. Like you have to actually look into it, like what it is and like what it does. But there's a nice overview to every single item. And there, if you look to the very last row, which is kind of it's very small from probably the people in the back, but I'll go through it. It's basically what every single example of rendering targets has a different framework. So that begs the question: do I really need to use like a different framework for every single rendering target that I want to use? Or am I going to write my app in like 5 different frameworks and maintain those? So it feels like this, right? We're back to the I'm really confused state, basically. And this is where Next basically helps you, which is we allow you to do multiple different, per page, you can choose which rendering target you want to use. So let's first go into pre-rendering, which is you generate static HTML at build time. So this means we just created a static page, which is just, it doesn't have any blocking data requirements. So there's no fetches to get data and that kind of thing. So it's great for like marketing pages, your blog. It has great SEO because everything is static HTML rendered on the server. And the only downside there is that content changes require a rebuild. However, this doesn't matter because this is all in your code, right? You have the HTML inside of your code already, the JSX, basically. Then there is server-side rendering, which means that you render when a user does a request. So every single request that comes into your server, it will do some data fetching logic. Like in this case, we have this special method called getInitialProps to get all your data. And if it's there, we basically assume that the page is going to be server-side rendered. So this returns a post from headless CMS, which is a beautiful library that does nothing but return one post. You can use it on NPM. It will just return ID 1, and that's it. But that's a story for another time. And this will server-side render so on every request. And this is just a different page, right? We have the about.js, and we have the product ID with a dynamic ID, basically. And then there's client-side rendering. So if you only want to render in the browser, you can actually also do that using Next and like inside of pages. All you have to do is create a React hook, actually, that triggers when something is mounted, basically. So you use like UseEffect and then do a set state when the UseEffect is called. And this works really good for like dashboards and internal applications and like your classic single-page application, basically. However, there's something more. Like, what if you want to go beyond React rendering? So Next allows one additional rendering strategy, or actually two that are similar to each other, which is AMP. So I don't know if anyone of you have heard of AMP. Can we do a show of hands? It's a lot, actually. Sometimes like I give this talk to people, and they're like, oh, I don't know what AMP is. It's a standard created by Google, but it's now basically maintained by a group of companies that basically allows you to build very fast web pages. So the way this works is you write your code in a specific way, like the HTML, it's HTML standard, and that allows crawlers like Google and Bing and like all these other companies to index your pages and show them inside of the search engine. So this means that in Google, you'll actually see if you search for Next.js, because we have AMP in Next.js.org, that it shows this lightning icon on the next to the URL, basically. And this lightning icon means that if you click on it, it's going to be instantaneously loaded inside of Google without going actually to the website, but it's rendered inside of Google using extra caching, and like it's just really fast. And there's two ways to use AMP. So there's AMP hybrid, which means that you have a Next.js React page on one side, and then you have an AMP page for like when crawlers index it, basically. So when Google comes by, it will actually like index the AMP page too, but your users are never going to it directly. And this works really well if you like want to incrementally adopt AMP, for example. And then there's AMP first, which means that all the whole page will be rendered in AMP, also for desktop users and that kind of thing. And in doing so, you basically get a really fast web page that is almost instantly loaded. And we optimize like a lot of different things on this. And to go back on the whole strategies a bit, so all these strategies can be combined. So the about.js could be a pre-rendered to HTML plus hybrid AMP. Then the dashboard can be completely client-side rendered. And your product ID can be server-side rendered. And this can all be in the same app. So you're building this one app that has all these different rendering methods. So you basically don't need multiple frameworks to do these different methods, basically, of rendering. So it's unified in a single framework. And it works for like websites and web applications, basically. And it allows you to build truly hybrid applications. However, generally, you're not just building a front end, right? For example, your website might need a contact form or like some extra logic that you want to like execute, get some data back, that kind of thing. So you need some kind of backend to handle your data that comes back from the forms. So I don't know if you ever build a backend service using Node.js, for example. But there's like this almost standard thing that everyone always does, which is you create a separate project or a directory inside of your project. You install your favorite web server, which could be like Express or something like that. You create the endpoint, and you run the server on a different port than your front end, basically. So you have two servers running at this point. And every time you make a change, you have to restart your server. This is really important because if you don't, you still have the server running on the old code. And you can request the endpoint, but it will return the old code data, basically. So if you, I've done this many times, basically where you make changes and you're requesting the API endpoint and you're like, it doesn't work. I made all these changes, it doesn't work. So you have to restart your server, and then like 10 minutes later, you're like, oh, wait, I forgot to restart my server, and then you restart the server, basically. Or you need some extra library to handle it for you, basically. So you basically need an API server that can scale with your project. Because running multiple projects is not going to scale to above more than a few endpoints. So that means that if you have like 100 endpoints, what are you going to do? You're going to like boot up 100 different ports and then like figure out like how that's all going to tie together, right? So starting with Next.js 9, you can actually create endpoints in Next. So that means you don't need a custom server or something like that. You don't need to install Express to handle most of your logic. By just creating a pages directory with an API directory inside of it. So you create pages API contact.js. And inside of that contact.js, you can use the same programmatic usage as Express. So you get request and response, and you can do like rest.json, which returns some JSON data, but you can also send files back and that kind of thing. And some of the middlewares from Express are also included by default, so that you don't have to configure them, basically. So you have request.query, request.body, request.cookies, which is not the default, but we include it by default because everyone has it in their server. And then you end it with logged the body, basically. So the fun thing of this is that you actually get all the benefits that Next already gives you for API routes. So it's probably already playing, but I'm not sure exactly. But let's go through it. Let's see. So if you make changes to your API endpoint, it's automatically updated. So let's go through this. I hope it plays now. OK, there it goes. So you basically open the file, and it says you have just a very simple endpoint. And you boot up the Next.js server, which handles your basically everything for you in terms of like compilation, that kind of thing. And then you do like you curl the API /hello. Then you change it to hello world, basically. And then you save it. And then you curl again, I hope. Yeah, it does that. And then you have hello world without restarting anything, without like getting out of context of what you're doing and that kind of thing. And this all just works by default. So then there is the question of you're building a front end and an API endpoint or multiple API endpoints, and they are handling data, right? They're rendering data or they're handling data in a certain way. And you can't afford them to break because like it will be bad for your business and you lose money and that kind of thing. We all don't want that, of course. So how do you avoid bugs, basically? That's the question, right? And generally, how people do this is using static type checking, like Typescript. So who here has used Typescript before, uses Flow or anything else in their day-to-day job? Cool. It's quite a lot of people. It's starting to catch on. It's really interesting to see that everyone is now like in this space where they want to incrementally adopt either TypeScript or Flow or like some other static typing tool. So starting with Next 9, you actually get automatic TypeScript by default. So you create pages /about.tsx, which is a TypeScript with JSX file. And that can have typings and that kind of thing. And it makes it work automatically. So that means that you don't have to set up tsconfig. Everyone that has set up TypeScript before has set up this tsconfig and had to like figure out all these options. And then they didn't know like exactly what the correct options were, and then it like sort of works, but still not really in the correct way. So we set up this tsconfig for you, and like we help you like optimize it basically. You can still make some changes there, and then on top of that, Next will fail the build if there are TypeScript errors that are in your app. Basically, like it can't compile at that point. And furthermore, the Next.js core is written in TypeScript now. So that means that every single file that you import has typings. So if you use a component, it will show you which props you are using if you're using like VS Code or like some editor that supports TypeScript. And on top of that, you get just really good like type checking on those components too. So if you basically add in an extra property that doesn't exist basically in Next.js, it will also yell at you and say like, hey, you added in this property that's not there. So yeah, now you've built your project, and let's fast forward into the future. Your application has grown to hundreds of pages. You're like a very successful company, or you have like a very big startup now, right? And there's one problem there. Every page that you add in like a standard tool is adding onto your build time, right? Everything gets slower basically, because compilation needs to like compile all these pages for you. So how do you solve this? And there's like some prior art here, which is Yarn, basically. It's already playing, but it's really fast, so I'll just replay it. It's basically, if you run Yarn, I don't know if you ever used Yarn, but it's like this alternative NPM package manager. And if you run Yarn in a directory where it already has been executed before, it will finish in like 0.34, 35 seconds, which is incredibly fast, right? Because like installing dependencies is really slow. So what Yarn does is it diffs all the changes that have been made to your project since the last time it has been run, basically. And we started out on this journey to basically make something similar for Next. Like if you run multiple Next builds, to avoid rebuilding pages when there are no changes, basically. And the Next.js build pipeline will like understand which pages have changed, and then only recompile changes that are actually there, that are actually made there. So say you have a header component that is in like every single of your, or like in half of your application, say like it's half of the application, then it will only recompile that half of your application, not the rest of it. So it will like cut your build times in half, but in most cases you're not changing the header all the time, right? You're changing certain pages. And that will just bring down your build times to like 10 to 20 seconds in most cases. And it reduces your build times from hours to milliseconds, basically, right? This is still in the works and it's not out yet, but it's something that we're actively working on. So yeah, Next.js basically scales with your project. So you go from my personal website, which doesn't have that much stuff on it. If you go to it, it literally has 2 paragraphs of text and a very nice logo. To Hulu, which is a very, very big streaming company in the US. Hopefully soon in the UK and everywhere else too. And it's just a really big app. So, and there's not even Hulu, but there's thousands of really big companies using Next in production to serve their main experiences, basically. So that goes from your personal website to the largest companies in the world, like literally the largest companies in the world, like Tencent, which is like the 6th largest website of the internet, for example. But also really well known here, Deliveroo, for example. But also GitHub, Zillow, which is a large housing company, Hilton, Eurostar. I took the Eurostar here. I ordered on this website that was built in Next. It's very cool. And like Marvel, for example, and all these other companies. And specifically with Hulu, we did a case study. So you can go to this website and you can see like how Hulu approached their like migration to Next and that kind of thing. And then if you want to learn more about Next and like get really into like how everything works and like basically in a playful way get your way through like how to start using Next, I would recommend going to Next.js.org/learn, which basically is an interactive tutorial where you build all these apps with Next. And it just helps you understand all the different aspects that we provide. And that was it.
Quick one. In terms of testing, does it change anything for you? There is any kind of extra test or different techniques that you find like you should use if you pass to Next.js, or it's just something like a layer on top and you just test as you will do your own React app and you don't care?
Currently, it's the same as building React, like testing React apps. So you use either you do unit testing using React testing library or something like that, or you use Cypress for like integration tests, that kind of thing. We ourselves test Next using Selenium in, funnily enough, 5 or 6 different browsers. So we still do that. We really care about backwards compatibility with like IE11 for the framework itself. But we also test like all these other things like hot module replacement and like all these things, all the features of Next basically. So we make sure that it never breaks between upgrades and that kind of thing.
The example that you showed before that was using hooks.
Yeah.
Do you have examples? Are these available in the GitHub repository? Because
this one in particular not, but it's like 2 lines of code, so I can like request it in. But it's literally you do use state, and then you do UseEffect with the second parameter being an empty array, and then the function is literally set state mounted true, and that's it.
How does this work with get initial props?
Get initial props will still run on the server, and then return the props. But if you're doing that in particular, you would want to do client-side fetches. Cool. Yeah, so I have one more thing, which I was saying. There's an Easter egg in this Next.js website. Actually, it's a Next.js website that has many Easter eggs, and it's called Magic Leap. So I don't know if you ever heard of this, and I'm going to this website and you can't see it. So let me just fix that. So I hope this still works, because otherwise, let's see. So Magic Leap is this VR glasses, basically, or AR glasses, I must say. So you like look through them, but you can see like this augmented reality world. Very cool stuff. They use Next for pretty much everything they do. So you go to the 404 page, which is, /404, oh my 0. So I have a MacBook Pro, and it has this funny thing in the keyboard where it doesn't allow you to press 0 anymore. But anyway. So this is really funny. So you see the light there, right? It's blinking. So I don't know if anyone of you knows Morse code. I don't. So I won't translate it, but it says something with rounds and stuff, I think. So let's just try something with rounds. Right? There's this thing opening. What is this, right? So let's accept the cookies because we're all GDPR compliant. So let's just try clicking it, because like, what's going on here? And suddenly you're in this different universe. And it's really cool. And it's built in Next, and it uses WebGL, and they have like many, many engineers that are really good at this stuff, because they're an AR company, of course. Oh, there's a skyline of Magic Leap logos. I don't know what's happening, but like, this is just really cool. I just wanted to share it. Anyway, yeah, thank you very much.